Welcome, everyone. My name is Kavetta Anderson, and I'm here today with my awesome co presenter, Mrs. Janae Jones Boston. Both of us are English teachers at the Varina High School, and we have a great presentation ready for you guys with the title Intersectional Literature, Balancing Academic Rigor and Cultural Relevance. We got a lot of good stuff ahead for you, and my co presenter is going to take it away.
Thank you for that introduction. We want to give an overview of how we came to such an important topic. We realize that our classrooms are little societies of a very complex world. And as systems are evolving and diversity is a major topic in the honors and advanced placement track, it's important to address both engagement and retention. We noted at our school that there was a decrease between English 9 honors, which Kavetta teaches, and English 12 AP, which I teach. And we were concerned about why our students weren't sticking with this rigorous, this high opportunity program. And so we decided that we needed to work on guiding our students through authentic text. So our purpose is to examine how rigor and culturally relevant literature go hand in hand. We're going to talk about some instructional strategies, backwards design assessment, and even give you some student work samples.
All right, thank you so much, Janae. So as we move forward throughout the presentation, kind of consider this a lesson for you guys as well, a teachable moment or experience as well, because we wanted to make sure that this presentation was also very practical and that when you leave this site or you leave this presentation, you have something to take back into your classrooms. And so the essential question or overarching question we thought of was, how do we balance instructional rigor and cultural relevance? Oftentimes what we see, whether it be in meetings or professional learning opportunities, or even the buzzwords that we see online, teachers tend to find themselves in places where we think one has to happen without the other. And the intention here is for you guys to see how both exist in the same way. So that brings us to our next point, which is our enduring understanding. To make it plain, culturally relevant literature does not limit Black students to Black books, nor does it limit white students to the classics or removal of the classics as a whole. When we get into talking about intersectional literature, or literature that is also culturally responsive, we're talking about striking a balance between the two so that all students have a well-rounded exposure to complex literature of all that features all types of characters, all types of experiences, and also garners and suits or accommodates the lived experiences of students in our classrooms. So what is intersectional literature? This is actually a term that Janae and I thought of together because we thought it would be essential for the audience to understand what we mean by intersectional literature. Well, intersectional literature transcends any traditional notions of a classic text through inquiry and critical thought of global society. So, in other words, when students enter your classrooms and they are accessing or reading that short story, or that poem, or that novel, or that article, or even the video that you've chosen for your lesson that day, there's a few questions we want you to consider or think about asking yourselves. Does this text promote further or deeper inquiry? Does it foster deeper thought about the global society as a whole? Do students see themselves and other people through this piece of literature that I've selected for them?
And right along with some other key terms, if you just want to take a moment to reflect, because words like culture and relevant are always on a hot topic, but sometimes it's hard to figure out what is a culture. So when we think about the groups of beliefs in society, there are different attitudes, characteristics, traditions that go along with different organizations. Relevant meaning having the matter at hand, whether it's time relevant or a current event issue. We have cultural relevance education. And then we also have reality pedagogy, which Chris Emden brings up. And it's the fact that we should connect the academic content to what's actually happening in the real world and how it's actually impacting students. We talk about it being real for students. Our activities are real, the text is real, so it's happening in real time, and that makes perfect sense with their connection to their writing and their reading and how they navigate social media and instant gratification. And we also want to make sure that their lives and backgrounds are reflected in what we do in our classrooms. And from there, we have this hierarchy of needs and how being a part of a classroom is just so important. We've studied Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we know as teachers, we can help students navigate these different levels. And we know that we want them to get to that highest level of self-actualization when they are driving their education. They are proud of themselves, they are at their best. And authentic instructional texts are going to help students attain these steps with the focus on love and belonging and building your communities. But what happens when we don't get it right? Because there are times, and we've been very honest in this process, how we got to this presentation, where as educators, we've had missteps. And so what we would like to have happen is that our students have this beautiful stairwell of reaching their full potential. They have all of their needs met, and they graduate with the Virginia profile of a graduate, and they are able to do whatever they want to do. However, sometimes the messages that we send in our classrooms don't align. And when that happens, we can create an indignant hierarchy of needs. And what that means is that our students feel shame in our classrooms, and they don't feel recognized, and they don't feel connected. And so does being quote unquote smart in the honors or AP class align with who they really are as a person? Does it align with the cultural values that they're being taught in their safe places at home? And at worst, when this belonging piece is left out, they fall. And then they are grasping for achievement. And what Kavetta and I are trying to do is talk about this belonging gap and how we can create a bridge to get them back to that achievement level and back on that stairwell.
And so along the lines of belonging, we also looked at what research said about how students' minds work and what their feelings also involve when it comes to accessing their learning experiences. And so we pulled some research. I looked at some research from Zaretta Hammond and Carol Dweck. And the mindset is a huge piece. And so what we've seen, both Janae and I, with our own experiences at our home school, is that, we have students who start out strong in on the honors track. They may continue on to honors English 10, and then there's that huge dip between AP English 11 and AP English 12. Well, what we're finding personally, and what we believe to also be the case for other educators similar to us, is that the mindset piece is also what is impacting students. And so if students don't see or see themselves in their classrooms, they don't sense a feeling of belonging or a sense that they can be successful or that their competence may grow and develop, the work has value and it's practical for them, then some of them are, in so many words, confronted with social suicide. Do I continue the honors or AP track, or do I step down a level to stay in the classroom where people look like me, where I may, have a teacher or instructor who's going to cater to my needs more socially and emotionally? And so with the mindset piece, we think that, and what we believe here also, is that the culturally responsive teaching practices that also align with using authentic and valid texts, also a balance of rigor and cultural relevance, may help fill some of those gaps for students so that we can continue to build a bridge and also build a better trajectory between Honors English 9 and the AP courses that students would end up on.
And as we look at the reasons why some of the students don't stay in, Kavetta mentioned the supports. Maybe if I go back a step, I might receive more strategies or supports. And we found that through Banks and Emden that there are connections between instructional strategies and the cultures of Black and Brown students. And so some of these terms refer to, harmony, and the fact that if they're unwelcome, they're going to be uninterested in the learning environment. And so how do you create a classroom environment that is welcoming and warm and inviting to all students, regardless of their creed, their race, their socioeconomic, sexuality, all of these different labels on the identity wheel. Understanding that communalism is very important as well. We talk about collaboration a lot, and knowing that for some students, competition is a driving force, but for others, it's not. And so figuring out what strategy works best with understanding your kids is very important. Chris Emden also talks about the power of co-teaching with your students. I thought this was mind-blowing. My favorite setting is a collaborative setting, and having another adult in the classroom is powerful. But you might have 28 other leaders in your classroom, and this is their space for their voice and their choice in the classroom. And we need to learn our students so that they are advocates and they are part of the dialogue as we're creating our instructional activities and our instructional strategies. And this all goes back to the importance of relationship building. Zaretta Hammond mentions that there are multiple layers of culture, and most of us are at the surface. That's what we reveal through our food, through our dress, and our music. It's often what's all stereotyped because it's what's very visible. Kavetta also mentioned some of the social pressures of the surface level to fit into a certain culture based on what is visible. You then go to shallow and intermediate, which are the nonverbal communication tools, and then this deeper level of understanding how you view yourself and fairness and moral codes and values. And that's going to require authentic conversation and dialogues within your classroom. So all of this talk about culture and relationship building, why is it important in the English classroom? One reason is because accessibility. We often talk about the power of activating prior knowledge. Well, if you don't know what your kids know, how do you know how to get them to the next level? If you don't know what they're interested in, how do you know how to get them excited in your lessons, get them excited with what you're doing? So by having this understanding, this real deep understanding of your classroom culture, you are activating prior knowledge so that they can access the text. And then you're also building the connections between current events, the text, what's going on in Virginia, what's going on in America, globally, so that we're reaching that global citizenship level. And this is hard work. We strongly suggest that teachers do it first. Think about yourself. What are your own levels? What do you show people versus what is very deep within you? And then also try to work with your students and figure out what are their cultural layers so that we can continue building and having a dialogue around these conversations.
Well done. Janae made a good point. We don't know what students don't know. Well, oftentimes students don't know what they don't know either. And one of the things that we're working on with the vertical planning and vertical articulation that we're having in our school within our department is trying to figure out how to best mirror the instructional strategies and the practices that would pop up both in honors English classes, in addition to AP classes as well. And one of the first things that we looked at is text authenticity. Well, what are authentic texts? What do we mean by that? These are texts that truly specifically speak to validating students' lives, their lived experiences, regardless of ethnic backgrounds, nationalities, genders, sexual orientations. These are texts where students can see themselves in them. They see the experiences of other people, in addition to the world, through the literature that they are presenting. And so what we also want to drive home here as well is that the checkbox method is not enough. And that can happen very easily with English teachers. I think both Janae and I have probably been guilty of it as well in previous years, where it's like, well, I want to really engage my students. I want to make sure I'm pulling culturally responsive literature. Does it check these boxes? Do I see diverse characters? Do I see a marginalized group of people placed at the forefront here? Do I see some sort of social justice themes? But unfortunately, that doesn't entirely meet the mark when it comes to choosing and selecting authentic texts. So for our next point here, authentic texts are mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. Just to echo what I said for our previous slides. As a teacher, we can mirror or validate and affirm students' experiences in our classrooms. We can also use literature as a window to kind of help build and affirm their sense of self. And also the sliding glass door that kind of bridges them to the more complex instructional material that they need to access. And so what we're also saying here too is that students have a right to all types of text, and regardless of whether or not it is a core text or supplemental. And so what tends to happen sometimes when we look at culturally responsive literature is that the classic is placed at the forefront. For example, that might be The Hobbit, for example. And the culturally responsive piece might be The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac Shakur. What we're also saying here is that it's okay to swap the two.
And so how do we swap the two? And this is our first kind of moment of engagement. And it is something that we went through as a team. We're currently going through it as a team, and we're going to walk you through balancing that rigorous and authentic text. When my students hear the word rigorous, they hear the word hard. And honestly, that's what I think it either was harder work or more work. And we wanted to shift that to complex work. And so when we think about rigorous text, we're looking at the variety of themes so that students have multiple windows into a literary piece. Quality character development. A lot of times we have a very stagnant character, whereas when we get to the higher AP text, we really want characters that are shifting. And so, yes, it's great that they are reflecting their culture, but can we do more? And are we picking texts that continue to push the character development? We also need a variety of plot structures. A lot of literature is written very linear, but how do we use flashback or foreshadowing, or how do we use stream of consciousness, all of these complex plot structures so that they have exposure to it. And then of course, the use of literary elements and techniques to create multiple layers of meaning. You know, we can watch some of our favorite movies because they are our glue movies and they just feel good. But there's some movies that we watch and we're like, I missed that. That's what it happened. That's why I love this movie. And we want our students to come back to literature and have those moments of layered meaning so they come back to it. And when all of this works together, it gets us to our future ready graduates. And Virginia's 5 C's. We have a 6C in Henrico County, so we included it in here. But when we are choosing rigorous and authentic text, our students are critical and creative thinkers. And our intersectionality text definition says we want them to have inquiry. We want them thinking and we want them talking, which leads to communicating and collaborating. When they are working through these character developments and themes, there are moments for them to create dialogues and seminars. And then lastly, they are reflecting on their personal character through the characters we read, and they're becoming global citizens and developing levels of empathy for what's going on in the world around them. So I completed a text audit, and I will be very frank, it was hard this summer to reflect on my own shortcomings as a teacher. So you can see it on the right, what I tried to do. You start by collecting your data. And I just went through and I listed my anchor text. And so at this point last year, I was teaching Macbeth, Chronicle of a Death Foretold, The Great Gatsby, and Things Fall Apart. Those were like my big texts. We were going to read them. Probably not in total because we believe in doing excerpts, but those were going to be my anchor texts. And then I had to do some research behind the text. I look at my author demographic, what are some of the topics and themes, the publication date. So what I did for your example, I pulled Things Fall Apart by Achebe, and I pulled out that, okay, it was written in 1958. My gosh, it's getting a little old. You know, its publication date is over 50 years old. And so it's starting to get a little weary. I know that he is from the Igbo language. And so I know that there is some diversity there. I know that it is from the continent of Africa. Like I can pull all of that quick information from it. I then started providing rationale. Okay, what SOLs did I want to teach with it? What AP strands did I want to teach with it? What genre did I want to teach with it? And all importantly, in public schools, I also needed to address the availability. Did I have enough in the workroom? Or could I get enough from our resources? Then I had to connect to vertical team. Is the book or the author being repeated? And then, which I should do, which I'm going to do next year, you learn, is also include student voice in a survey. You know, what texts and authors did they enjoy reading? What were their favorite or least favorite throughout the year? And when I looked at it and did my part 2, my reflection and analysis, what was guiding the selection of the text, it wasn't my curriculum. You know, I had 2 SOLs. I probably could have found a text that could do more complex SOL alignment. Teacher preference, absolutely. I loved reading this in high school. This was my favorite high school read. I have my annotated copy. I show the kids. I'm so proud of what I did in 12th grade. I read it in one night. I know I love this book. And I was hoping that my passion would carry over for my students. Is it part of the canon? Yes. And so I'm like, okay, they need access to the canon. But was it close to my students? No. They were very far from the text. However, they were close to some of those issues of change and masculinity, fate and power and colonies and being overtaken. And so I had to do some reflection about whose voices and histories and priorities are being represented in my class. And I had to realize that I did not have a single female author. I did not have a single African-American author. I did not have a Black voice in my class as the anchor text. And I didn't have anything that was close to my students. So I pulled what supplemental text I was reading along with Things Fall Apart. We excerpt Americana and The Second Coming. And I said, you know what? This year, Americana is going to be the anchor text. And so by going through this process, I was able to do some reflection. And like I said, it was tough because I prided myself on being a very specific type of teacher, and I still have gaps and I'm still learning. So by going through this audit, I'm able to shift my instructional design, my anchor text, to do more work. And so Kavette is going to explain a rubric that we hope you guys can use in the future.
Thanks so much, Janae. Like I said earlier on at the beginning of the presentation, we really want what we're doing here to be practical and applicable to what you're already doing in your classrooms. And so we kind of designed a rubric here so that if you wanted to do an audit or you wanted to look at the books that you currently have in your classrooms or even your department's book room, you have a quick, simple checklist that you can kind of go through to determine whether or not the text is culturally responsive. First off, does it meet your instructional needs? And so that, of course, may vary depending upon the academic track of the students that you're teaching, the grade levels, the Lexile levels. And so we thought of a blanket concept here. You know, do the concepts, the ideas, and the characters support instruction that aligns with what you're doing as far as the SOL standards are concerned, in addition to your grade level? And so that's a quick yes or no. And so if there's comments, feedback, or ideas that you're thinking of as you're reflecting on whether or not you want to incorporate this text into your current unit of study or for that particular class, the comment section would be appropriate for you. The next, of course, is academic rigor. What we are doing here in so many words is kind of dismantling the belief that a certain type of text, whether it be traditional or not, has to be at the forefront of instruction in our classrooms. Um, we also want teachers to begin thinking about what it really means to be a part of the canon, what it is that we would consider, or how is it certain texts or pieces of literature kind of garner the name classic. Well, academic rigor, according to what we're getting across here, is that it's any type of text that involves complex sentence structures, formats, characters, complex plot development, multiple literary elements, as well as multiple layers of meaning. In addition to that, the concepts may also foster dialogue that extends beyond the actual lesson or what the students read for that day. As far as cultural relevance, does the text validate and affirm your students? Regardless of whether or not those students are African American, white, Hispanic, Latino, or Asian, do those students see themselves in the material that's being presented in front of them, regardless of whether or not the text is young adult literature or considered classic? Is there a way to strike that balance there so that we see elements of academic rigor and also relevance? And for the last piece, currency and connection, like Janae mentioned earlier, with proximity. Does the setting of the text, the events, or the character's development parallel students' lives and what is going on currently in society? So what we find oftentimes is that, for example, and this happened for me personally as well. I had an honors class last year, I believe, and I decided to be brave. The popular ninth grade text is Romeo and Juliet, and oftentimes, some, myself included, have assumed that, well, my white students may enjoy Romeo and Juliet more so than my Black or Latino students, right? Well, and I said, I want to be different this year. We'll try Othello. And when I told my students that we were not reading Romeo and Juliet, they erupted like we had just gotten off of a roller coaster at King's Dominion. And I was very, very shocked and very, very surprised by that. And that is what began to challenge my notion of what it meant to be culturally responsive. So when we talk about currency and connection, despite the ethnic backgrounds of my classroom or nationalities and experiences, there were students in there who still didn't feel close to Romeo and Juliet. Despite the fact that they still need exposure to complex literature, that text in particular just wasn't something that they felt proximity to. Versus when I described the betrayal, the characters, the two-faced nature of some of the characters in Othello, and I also mentioned how, Othello was the only African-American character in much of Shakespeare's work, students were immediately intrigued by that. And so the currency and connection piece makes a difference as well.
Thank you, Kavetta, for drawing in the making sure our kids feel connected to the work. And this is an activity, again, we're just trying to make it practical for you guys because these are things we're doing in our classroom. How to build a connection between identity and characters. So this is an activity called the Bullseye. And what the kids do is they kind of create social labels for their identity around the bullseye. You could do this either collectively or individually. Then they're going to reflect on their own identities. You can share. This is a great activity for the beginning of the year to build relationships, to build your class culture. Green means your identity matches the dominant. Yellow, you're marginalized. And red means that combined with other aspects, you are outside, you are largely marginalized in this area. So our students created this bullseye template and they could put different things on it. We have done it where religion was added. Recently, they wanted to add popularity because they're all social media. It's all about the likes. It's all about all of those moments. So they wanted to add popularity. But these are parts of their identity that they wanted to talk about. So then to help with your proximity of a character, you can figure out how close am I to this character. They take their original bullseye that you do at the beginning of the day, the beginning of the year, and they're going to mark themselves versus a character. When you see this, this also takes a moment, like Kavetta mentioned, to say, well, my kids are no longer interested in this text. They've evolved. Our school's demographics shift. And so what worked 5 years ago might not work anymore. So this is a great reflection piece. Or you can also use it as character analysis, where students are reflecting on specific characters. So my student did The Hate U Give, and she is a diamond and Star is the circle. And you can see that they share a lot in common. They are very close in their character's identity. And she loved it the whole year. If I wanted to talk about a text, the student was going to talk about The Hate U Give and Star. We know that this is a very popular YA novel, but there's probably because she saw herself in that character as well. And she had a deep connection. We also did this with Othello for complexity charts, for them having to track the complexity, if you can see, around ability status or social class, that there's more than one dot. And they then had to use textual evidence to support where they placed the dot on it. So you can make it as personal for the students. And I never ask students to share their identity charts with me. I did ask for presentation rights for this student, but I know that that's private. But when they do character work, it's a great opportunity for them to see how textual evidence can lead to identity and complexity. And so now Kavetta is going to walk you through the instructional piece of how we're really trying to bridge this gap. We have our text. Now what, Kavetta?
Well, thank you so much, Janae. And so when we talk about building the bridge, this is all about making sure that when my kids leave me, they are more than ready and prepared to be successful by the time they get to Ms. Boston in AP English. And so with building the bridge, we're looking at designing and implementing mirrored instructional strategies that also foster that deeper literary analysis that's going to be necessary to be successful in an AP English class alongside culturally relevant literature. And so along those lines, something I also wanted to mention was that I had the opportunity to attend AP training last year. And one of the things that I recall being highlighted often throughout the training is that there's nothing anywhere that says you have to teach these 5 or 10 texts every single year. And so when we talk about literature and literature that's culturally responsive, it's important to gauge whether or not that text has proximity to students in their lives, whether or not they see themselves in it. Because when we get into the curriculum and making sure that students can engage well with these standards, access them, and show knowledge and understanding of them, it's important to make sure that that text is authentic and also accessible. And so what I have here is actually a student work sample coming up for a unit performance task that my students completed, where they were looking at the impact that word choice has on audiences. And so I told the story about how I was up one Sunday night trying to figure out what I wanted to do for the week. And it just occurred to me that Amanda Gorman had done this beautiful poem for the presidential inauguration. And so here we have the standards, of course, the SOLs were much, of course, focused on word choice, author's purpose, summarizing purpose and thesis statement. And so I began each of my lessons for the day with the students' learning targets. And what students were looking for was how in particular, or what words or phrases in particular, Amanda Gorman used to impact the audience. Because we talked about how she kind of went viral. You know, we looked at examples of social media posts. We talked about how Hillary Clinton commented on her performance. We talked about how Oprah Winfrey gifted her a ring. And so she kind of became a mini celebrity. And so there were students who weren't really into poetry like that until they saw this poem or actually engaged with the whole experience around the presidential inauguration. And so what I call this assignment here was a guided analysis of the hill we climb. And so along the lines of making sure that instructional strategies mirror what students might have to do by the time they get to AP English, one of the things that I found with ninth graders in particular, I often say I wish I could go back and apologize to some of my middle schoolers or even the ninth graders that I started teaching earlier on, is because giving them a graphic organizer or giving them an extensive excerpt of a text and just saying, hey, go annotate this text, or hey, go analyze this text and write me an essay or complete this project that demonstrates you understood what you read, is not entirely effective. And so when we talk about building that bridge, that also means that providing certain scaffolds and supports for students to access the text is still okay even at the honors or advanced levels, because we don't want the skills or the minor small skills that students need to be successful at the AP level to be a barrier that continues to kind of contribute to that dip that we're seeing in our data at our school. Because what you guys will see shortly with the student work samples is that when the supports are put in place and the assignment was chunked, when the assignment was guided, they had very specific prompts to complete, the work itself was absolutely phenomenal. And The Hill We Climb was not an easy text to read. We did multiple reads of that poem, both during class time, and students also did the same independently while they were working on the project. So here, actually, we have the quick write that I actually started the unit with. And I wanted students to kind of think about what it was about her poem or the way she recited the poem that kind of made her go viral. And so this is that activation of prior knowledge piece. There were students who didn't watch the inauguration because that's not something that we can assume that all of them had the opportunity to do. There were students who weren't really into poetry like that or wouldn't have thought to pay attention to the poem in particular when it came to the inauguration as well. And so I wanted them to think about how and in what ways people responded to her reciting the poem and what in particular she did to engage the audience. And so we'll get into that a little bit more in the next slides. The first thing I did, though, was look at the poem itself. You know, what was it that made Amanda Gorman's poem so special or so unique in such a way that I felt it was suitable for my honors English students? Could I have chosen a poem by Edgar Allan Poe? Of course. Could I have chosen a poem by Langston Hughes? Absolutely. Could I have even chosen Maya Angelou? Of course. But there was something about Amanda Gorman that I felt reached and connected with my students in my particular classrooms a little bit better. As far as the rigorous component, Amanda Gorman absolutely hit the nail on the head with multiple literary elements and techniques. You guys will see that throughout the students' assignments, there's a lot of talk about tone and mood and imagery and the impact that her word choice had on the audience and also conveying the purpose of the message she tried to get across. There were several layers of meaning demonstrated throughout the word choice. And we also paid attention to the shifts throughout her poem as well. Students noticed that sometimes the poem or the word choice seemed a little bit more positive. Sometimes it shed a light on an aspect of our country that we don't always really want to acknowledge. And I thought it was powerful that students were able to pick up on that. There were definitely varied sentence lengths and text structures. It was also helpful for students to read along and annotate the poem while I actually played it for them. And so what they found was that, you know, even with her pauses and some of her stops and the way she inflected in certain places contributed to the impact and purpose that she tried to get across. And it also promoted inquiry of current events. Like I said, there were students who didn't watch the inauguration and weren't keeping up with the presidential election. And so that prompted more conversation about what was going on around that time period, unique and current to my students. As far as relevance, when I looked at students' quick writes for the prompt that you guys saw on the previous slide, a lot of them were really intrigued by her age because I think Amanda Gorman's like 20 or 21. And so she's not very far removed from them, yet she's been granted this huge opportunity that essentially is going to go down in American history. She's officially the youngest inaugural poet in US history, and they were really impressed by that. Her identity also was very intersectional. I saw in a lot of students' writing where they commented on the fact that, hey, we got this young African-American girl reciting a poem at the inauguration. For a lot of my Black female students, that really stuck out to them. For students who might have disabilities or students who were familiar with having to overcome some sort of odds or difficulties, they were really intrigued by the fact that she also overcame a speech impediment that she later mentions in the video on the next slide. And in her poem itself, she also alludes to issues, ideas, and situations unique to U.S. current events. And so we talked about allusion there as well. So The Hill We Climb was kind of like a package deal. And so what does it mean to guide the literary analysis? The poem wasn't 4 lines, right? And from what you saw on the previous slides, there were about 4 or 5 standards that I was hoping to try and cover with this one particular text. Well, what I decided to do was kind of chunk it, break it down, and help students or guide students along the way of looking at the poem from several different angles with structured support. So the first thing I did to kind of help access the text or build prior knowledge for them was I played a video for them where she was being interviewed on CNN by Anderson Cooper. And they thought that was really cool because I'm certain that I probably had students who probably wouldn't have looked at CNN prior to that actual moment in class. But it made it feel real. And so when we talk about authentic experiences and authentic texts, using real things and real people to help students access, digest, and also enjoy and engage with the text that they're reading. So on the next slide here, we see the first instructional strategy that I incorporated into this particular task was front-loading academic vocabulary. Something that I found from experience instructionally is that, with a skill as simple as paraphrasing, you could teach a lesson on it, you can model it, give students multiple opportunities to practice, but you may still get a student who will ask you what it means. So what I found is that students may understand the process or actually be able to demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the skill, but will get caught up on the terminology. And we don't want, the terminology or the absence of academic vocabulary to be another barrier that also kind of hinders that trajectory between honors English to AP. We want to remove the things that make kids feel like I may not be successful in this environment because of what I think it may look like, or the types of language or words that I think teachers may use in a higher level class. So here, I gave students the slides and the prompts where I gave them the definition of paraphrasing with an example of it as well, where I pulled a line from the poem, paraphrased it, and the students had a very guided response or guided option to respond as well with an example that they selected from the poem as well. So with all the following slides here for this particular assignment, I did not tell students what lines to go in and pull out of the poem. I told them to focus on what spoke to you and what you felt best did its job of speaking to the audiences, conveying the purpose and getting across the message that Amanda Gorman was trying to convey. For the next strategy, sentence frames is the jam in 9th grade. So we would like to think and believe that, if I give my students, a prompt, they should be able to respond accordingly, give me this full, well-developed essay or this full, well-developed paragraph. And so sometimes that students don't always hit the nail in the way that we want them to. And so sentence frames were another support that I put in place to kind of help guide what we're looking for when we talk about literary analysis, or even touching on all the points that are necessary to kind of get a good or a solid overview of a text. And so for the summarizing here, I gave students the frames where I gave them a paragraph. And what you see here with the words in blue, those were the lines or phrases or spaces where students had to fill in with the appropriate knowledge or skill. And so as you can see here, the student did a great job with conveying the form of the text, the title and the author, the message that she was trying to get across. She even included specific word choice that she used to help get that message across. And then in turn, how it also impacted the audience itself and who in particular was impacted by the text or the performances in addition to that. And so for the next one here, I made sure that students were intentional about identifying keywords. Oftentimes with text, I think sometimes kids will look at a piece of literature or poem or short story or article, and they think, oh, it's a lot of big words in here. I don't know what this means. And so sometimes something as simple as just take a highlighter or take a pen and tell me which words stand out to you. Which words do you think this speaker used to convey or create the biggest impact on the audience? And so to kind of hit that standard for connotation and word choice, I had students also select 5 words that stood out to them that they also felt conveyed or contributed to the overall meaning and message that Amanda Gorman was trying to get across here. And so I think that zeroing in on that specific word choice also help them to think deeper about how to really analyze that poem and what message she was trying to get across. For the third strategy, prompted support for textual evidence I've found has really helped my students a lot, because we know that when they get to AP, Mrs. Boston is going to say, hey, give me this essay, but make sure you can back it up with what you read in the text. And what I'm finding with my 9th graders when they come in is that they're not immediately ready to do that. And so prompted support, in other words, where I'm telling them exactly what it is that they need to look for, in addition to how to support that with what they've seen in the text, has proven very effective. This young lady, of course, determined that the tone of the poem was optimistic. She felt that the mood or what the audience was feeling from the poem was hopeful. And you see over here to the right, she selected a very specific word choice from the poem itself that supported both those tone and mood words that she selected. So for the last strategy for annotation, this is still a guided process as well. Given, like I said before, just giving them the poem and telling them to highlight, text, words, or phrases, and go into literary analysis, I found wasn't really lending itself well to seeing comments or annotations that were thoughtful or really demonstrated deeper understanding of the text. But for whatever reason, when it's placed in a T-chart or a graphic organizer, along with a very specific question that they need to ask, in addition to very specific things that they need to look for, you see here that the responses were phenomenal. And so prior to beginning this assignment here, there were a number of lessons on imagery and connotation where, we went through what that looked like and how speakers or writers use language to appeal to the audiences. And so this student here in particular selected a line or an example of imagery and discussed in detail how it appeals to the audience. So the frame that you see here as well, or the structure of her writing, is also very similar to what we've done in previous assignments. And so I also made sure to incorporate activities that would also mirror what they would see on this project right here as well. So for the next piece, we talked a little earlier about extending student cognition, and so when we talk about authentic literature and being culturally responsive, are we pulling in texts that encourage discussion and knowledge and inquiry beyond what we've done in class that day? And so I gave my students an extra credit opportunity. From what I could see with their writing and the way they did on this assignment in particular, I wanted them to kind of dig a little deeper. And it was easy to do because Amanda Gorman was a real person and someone that they felt proximity to, and also someone who essentially went viral on social media channels that they also interact with. And so I had them just submit a paragraph explaining the significance of the caged bird ring that Oprah Winfrey gifted to Amanda Gorman, also to kind of help drive home the impact that this young woman made on people because of the way she used word choice. So we got all these English SOL standards here, but we still see that with the structured support put in place that mirrors what students would be expected to do in AP English. Getting the work done and demonstrating knowledge of those skills was not at all a problem.
Thank you, Kavetta, for explaining how we get to this bridge and how we get kids to cross into this AP English 12. Our AP students are driving their own knowledge of text through application and strategies that are mirrored in what happens in English 9. I'm at the place now that I can say, annotate, and they know exactly what to do. So when your vertical team is tight, when you're working collaboratively amongst the adults, your students really start to shine. And that's what we're here to talk about, is that our standards are a cycle. What they see in English 9, they're going to see again in English 12, and even Advanced Placement College Board standards align. So while Kavetta had her kids working on specific word choice and syntax, I'm then talking about how that connects to theme across multiple texts. And AP has that exact same standard. Whereas 9.6E is the purpose and thesis statement. We get to that, and Kavetta hinted to, well, now you got to back it up. I need an effective conclusion. I need your judgment. I need your evidence and how to support your claim. And so the importance of this pipeline is more than just honors to AP. This is everybody's English pipeline. This is everybody's English track. And so what I did with a poetry unit is an end of unit task. Those are the SOL standards and how they're going to focus around it. And then my learning targets, we talked about America. You can't help but talk about America during this climate of what we were going through as a culture. And the AP unit was about perspective. And the question was, do we experience blank the same? Do we experience America the same? Do we experience Miss Boston's class the same? And how do we navigate those spaces? And so I started by examining my text. And there's a difference between an English 9 teacher and an English 12 teacher. So bear with us on our different strategies and styles. My kids, 9th grade, did an amazing job focusing in on one text. I threw a whole text set at them, said, let's go get it. And I was hoping to figure out the rigor of all of these texts. Yes, they all had multiple literary elements, deep layers of meaning through word choice, very centered structure, sentence structure and length, text structure, and there was inquiry with what's going on in the current events. But I did not do too good on that relevance piece again. This is a constant growth moment as we continue in our journey to be better educators. Did it allude to issues and ideas that were unique to the US passing current? Yes, but I was limited to white and African-American male voices. Me, Black female, did not include a Black female in my voice. I did not include anything other or a marginalized voice in my text. So why did I teach it? Because it was still very important that I taught this pipeline, this flow for poetry. Because the SOL says to compare and contrast traditional and contemporary poems from many cultures. So I needed to have a wide variety of texts. The pathway was important too. My students, I struggle. Pre-20th century works are hard. We do not speak that way anymore. I don't speak the language my kids speak now, and that's okay. But I have to give them access to that. And I also had to get to sonnet structure. That's a major component of the advanced placement standards. And then it's okay to have questions. That inquiry piece is so important. The kids can drive the discussion. Who is missing? And if they're missing, what does this say about the piece, the author, and the time? Why am I not here? And what does that say that someone values? Am I being devalued because I'm not in this space? And we need to remember that our students need access and exposure to all of these works to create empathy and develop their own questions. So a way to develop your text set order, this is my rationale. I like to book in my harder text. I do this because students receive the support in the scaffolds at the beginning. So we're gonna go the hardest one, the most vocabulary, the most punctuation. We're going to go all in because I'm there to hold their hand. I'm there to review what they had in English 9, those annotation strategies. Let's review together. And then I do a refresher at the end because that AP test is going to be hard. So I don't want you to get too comfortable. Let's go over and do a refresher. And I have to often remind myself what made this text hard. And this forces me at the beginning to figure out what strategies I need to put in place to support my students. I like to put pop culture in the middle, the YA novels in the middle, because they are engaged and closer to the text. So maybe if I scared them at the beginning, they'll come back to me at the middle. And they're able to use their strategies to build their confidence, but it's not supplemental. These texts are just as important as my beginning and my end, and I let my students know that we value all text in my classroom. And to create transitions, my entry text always connects to the previous text. This unit came out of a YA novel with social justice as the theme, and my exit was going to connect to our next unit for Shakespeare, so that the students have a logical progression throughout the entire piece. So I'm going to go back a slide. And we started with Walt Whitman, I Hear America Singing. I Too by Langston Hughes is a direct response to that poem. Natural, I think most teachers would have done that. And then I have my pop culture with This Is America. Childish Gambino, the video is powerful, we watch it. We do lyrical work around it and how someone in the 21st century is viewing and singing about America. We then switch back a little bit to America by McKay, and this is to teach sonnets. So same theme, but let's now address sonnet structure and how that's seen before delving into Shakespeare's Sonnet 130, and that's going to get us to Othello. So my instructional activities included a literature circle. Students TP class all the poems, then become experts in one. And again, because Kavetta did such a strong job, I can hand them that leadership role in the class that they can TP cast independently. We do an activity called 3 levels of reading, which I'll show on the next slide. So the students are able to demonstrate connections through visuals, and we often Socratic seminar. Seminar day, we do it every 6 weeks in my class, it's their favorite day, but it's the power of dialoguing and having accountability talk in our class for their findings and textual support. And again, that power of questioning. Some of the instructional strategies that we continue to use are those annotation skills and those close reading skills. That's the bridge from English 9 honors. When Ms. Anderson does such a strong job teaching them how to use the graphic organizer, I then can hand them the graphic organizer, or I can say, make your own. And I'll see Venn diagrams and mind maps and T-charts because they've had access to them so much at the lower levels. It's about that consistency of seeing some of the same things multiple times. We use visual representations, effective questioning. I love sitting back in a Socratic seminar and saying, why? Tell me more. And they hate every minute of it. And then they get it. And I can see their eyes light up. I can see their peers get proud of each other. So having those questioning moments. And again, I continue in AP to use scaffolded frames and outlines. At this level, we talk about, can you use it? Math gets formula sheets all the time because the student still has to know what formula to use at the appropriate time and what to input into that formula. That's where we are here. I can give them the world. I need them to show me that they know how to use it. And that's the same thing for that vocabulary access. We want them to have it. These are all still the jam, even at English 12. So a sample of what 3 circles would look like is that there are multiple layers of reading. You have the very literal on the line. So looking for direct quotes, looking for connotation, practicing direct quotes, between the lines, developing symbolism and imagery, allowing students to draw connections visually, and the metaphors and symbolism really helps ground their understanding of a work and valuing their creative space as well. And then beyond the lines is creating those thematic meanings. Again, students receive frames, and I tell students, you use the frame until you can break the mold. And so they are at different levels with that. We end with Socratic seminar questions, and we do planners. So they have to show me their questions to receive a grade. Then they actually, because not everybody's going to get up front and talk. So I do want evidence that they've done some prep work. But it's interesting to see the questions they come up with. And it's these closing questions that you realize this student did America by Claude McKay. And I thought that sonnet would be the farthest from some of their closing questions. But then they said, well, do you think that recent events, people have lost their nationalism? Or what does America mean to you? And we're getting to this level of inquiry and how powerful text can be, and they're sharing their voices. And to close with one of our instructional strategies, total, not on poetry, but just something, the power of activating prior knowledge, circling all the way back. You got to get to know your kids. Like I said, I taught Things Fall Apart last year. And when we started getting to the part of understanding the setting, it's a setting none of us had ever been to, and they couldn't quite grasp it. So we talked about the power of activating prior knowledge. And something that I did was create sensory experiences. A lot of time we access a text just by reading it. Kavetta mentioned that she had it read aloud by Amanda Gorman. And again, so we're getting that auditory and that passion behind it, but that's it. What do they smell? What do they feel? How can they really engage with it? And so this passage from Things Fall Apart is about the locust. And I realized that the closest thing we have in Virginia is mosquitoes and cicadas. They have no idea what a swarm would sound like. As they entered into class, it was playing in the background. And about every 5 minutes, I made my speakers louder until they could see and experience, well, hear to experience what that would actually mimic and why it was so overwhelming. We also, the importance of doing paired text for current events. We read that this would be 2020, there was a locust outbreak and Africa was struggling. Financially, their crops were not producing. And so we addressed that because not everybody that's sitting in your English class, it hurts me. Not everybody loves English, I know. It is hard to say out loud, but it's not for everybody. Somebody loves science. Somebody loves the ecology piece. Somebody loves the financial piece. And if I can draw them in by activating this prior knowledge, it does more. And again, front loading that vocabulary. It's okay for me to say, let me remind you of what this word means so that we can do more with it. And when they do more with it, they both work. You know, this is an AP prompt. And whether your students is talking about Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds or Othello, whether they're talking about The Hobbit or The Rose That Grew from Concrete, when you set up the scaffolds, when you make it authentic, when it is real to them, they are going to produce amazing work that deserves recognition, deserves our highest praise. And we are so proud of this opportunity to share with you.
Thank you guys so much again for joining us. Janae and I are really excited about the work we're doing and the work we're going to continue doing, and hope that this experience will be one among many where we will continue to be able to share the things that we're doing in our classrooms, what we find works, and what we also hope works throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. So just to leave you with one thing, let's remove the barriers so that we can continue to build that trajectory and help students cross that bridge into all areas of their lives where success is the end goal. Thank you guys again, and hopefully we'll see you next time.